Hey you guys, welcome or welcome back to Our Awaken. So for today's conversation, this is actually a little different, but I guess it's kind of like me just sitting here reflecting. And I thought, let me bring this conversation to YouTube just because I know I'm not the only person that feels this way. I don't know, I just feel like talking. So if you're listening, hi. I'm basically gonna be describing my life experiences of being an African who was born and raised in America and just how that has shaped just my life. And also just to struggles that I feel like I've experienced not fitting in with the African community because I'm seen as like too Americanized and just other different factors which are eventually going to come out in the video as I just continue to speak. So let's just get into the backstory of my life. So both of my parents are from Mali in West Africa. They came here in the 90s and they were both fairly young. I want to say like they were in their 20s. The common foreigner story of wanting to come to gain new opportunities and just build a better life for themselves. And when my parents came here, majority of their family was back in Africa. A lot of their siblings even to this day are still back in Africa. Some of them are in America, some of them are in France. So that's just like a brief backstory of my family. So now when it comes back to me, again, I was born in America, New York specifically, Harlem, and surprisingly, I've lived my entire life in America and I actually never have gone back to Africa. And I know every time I tell people this, they're like, really? Like you still never went back? I'm like, yeah, I never went back. And it's not that I never wanted to, but I feel like my mom would always have like a reason of why it's not the right time yet. But I have gotten to a point now where I'm just like, listen, I'm grown. I don't need your permission. I make my own money. So when I decide I'm gonna go, of course, I would like to go back with them just because like I don't know anybody over there. But I'm definitely gonna make it my mission to make my way to Mali because I definitely do want to go visit. Like so much of my family members I've never met. Of course, I maybe have them like on social media or my parents will talk about them. But to be honest, I barely have a relationship with a lot of my family members, which is kind of something that I've always felt like a little like just weird about because it's like, damn, I have so many family members out there that I don't really even know, that I don't engage with. When I was like a toddler, I don't really have like too much memory of just that time period of my life, but based off of like pictures and stories and just also knowing the people that were around, I would definitely say that I know that I had like the culture instilled in me, since my parents were freshly here and then family was coming here and oftentimes a lot of them did stay with us as they were settling in. I kind of got the vibe of what life would be like back home here when I was like a really young kid. When I say young, I mean like under 5 years old. But I feel like once I started to go to grade school and like high school, the family wasn't really around or as close-knit unit like before because like people started to have their own space and all of that. But also one thing that I've noticed is back home they have a really strong sense of community. So it's like family is always together, people are always together gathering and like just coming into union, versus I feel like in America that's kind of difficult to do. Back home it's very community based, so they have like houses where within the house there's like different houses so the family can still stay together and then people in the neighborhood are very close knit, versus here in America it's very individualistic. Like it's not as community based, especially when you think about it. Like apartments here, my family was a 4-person family, so what they could have done back home you can't really get away with here in America because you'll feel super crowded in the apartments, versus back home they have like really big spaces, so it can be a lot of them in a space and not feel overwhelming. So here it was kind of just like once everyone got here, like we all can't be under one roof, so eventually everyone is going to have to settle down and get their own space. So I feel like the community that they grew up in, I didn't grow, I mean I grew up in it, but I didn't really like in my developmental years I didn't experience that in the way that they did. And the first language that I was taught growing up is Bamanankan, which is also known as like Bambara. And I was super fluent in speaking it. Like people always tell me like for a little girl, I used to talk like a grown woman. But I feel like over time being in the American school system, and that's the only language that I'm speaking for so many hours within the day, especially since my parents worked a lot. So if I left the house, say around like 7, 8 o'clock to go to school, after school I had after school, and then after school I had like another kind of like after school. It was like an African daycare type of after school program. So I was basically out of the house from like, let's say 8 a.m. to almost like 8 p.m. to where my mom came to pick me up. So majority of my day was spent speaking English. So by the time I got home, like of course when I was younger, I would speak my native language. But after a while, the more that English was becoming a norm for me, the more that I stopped speaking my actual native language at home, especially since my parents, now that they're in the work field and now that they're engaging with people, they also had to speak English. So it's kind of just like if I'm speaking English a lot at school, they're also learning English. Some way, somehow within our communication, yes, we were speaking our native language, but like I started getting more comfortable with English. So we would speak English, or they would speak to me in the native language, but I would speak English. And I remember there would be times when my parents would always try to like force me, or not force me, but they'll be like, I need to speak the language in the house, or they're gonna pretend that they don't understand English to basically force me to speak the language, which I didn't mind doing. But I feel like the more time that was going by of just me being in the educational system, especially being that I have to engage with people literally for majority of my waking hours, I'm speaking English. I started to get so comfortable with speaking English that I started to, I don't want to say forget my language, because I never forgot the language. Like if a person speaks it to me, I'll always know what they're saying. But when it came to speaking it out of my mouth, I would sometimes forget certain words, or I would not feel as comfortable because I started to mix English within, like the language. So it got to a point where my parents was just like, you know what, they're gonna pretend like they don't understand English, which I get what they were trying to do. But then again, if you're telling me that you're going to pretend, in my mind, I know you're pretending, which means if I speak English, I know you're going to understand me. So what's going to stop me from speaking it? I get what they were trying to do though. So I would try to do it. But again, being that English was such a dominant language for me now, I would always say if I started speaking my language, I would then transition into speaking English. And, after a while, like they just kind of stopped trying to like fight me with it. But then the issue for me started to be like, say if family members were to come around and they were speaking the language to me, and now that I'm more comfortable speaking English, when I would then speak to them in my language, but I would also mix English in there, when they start clowning me, or when they start laughing like, oh, now I'm like American, or I don't know how to speak the language, or sometimes some of them will even say like, oh, that's not good, like I have to learn the language, it would make me feel insecure in even trying to practice the language, because I felt like I didn't have a safe space to do it. Because even when I'm trying, somebody has something to say and it's just like, can you just not say anything and just let me, mix my English in there? But because they were saying something, or because sometimes people would laugh, it would make me feel insecure to where I'm just like, you know what, I'm not even gonna waste my time doing this. Like I'm just gonna speak English. I know y'all understand me, so y'all gonna take it or y'all gonna leave it. And it also didn't help that growing up, I didn't really encounter a lot of Malian people. If anything, where I lived, there were a lot of people from Guinea there, which they speak a completely different language. And also when I was in school, I was either around a lot of just like Black American people, Hispanic people. That was in like grade school. And then once I got to high school, it was a lot of like Caribbean people. But there were also a lot of African people, but they were either from like Ghana or Nigeria, which is also different from the language that I speak. So I always felt like I never had like a community of Malian people my age to really engage with, to where it's like even if I wanted to brush up on my, like language, I could have people my age group to practice with. But I didn't even have that, like I was around either African people who weren't like me, or I was around non-African people. So there was really no way for me to make that connection. And then it's like to come across a Malian person was like really foreign. It was kind of just like, damn, like I know y'all out here, but where y'all at? So that also added on to me feeling that like sense of isolation. But also growing up, my parents weren't really like the party type. Because oftentimes, I'm not gonna lie, the African aunties, they be in every party. Like literally every party. I'd be like, how do y'all be finding out? But like I said, there's a really strong sense of community within the African community. Like literally everybody knows everybody. I realized over time, like my parents are more of like the low key type. Like they're not really in every mix, in every party, in every group. So in moments where I could have been around like say other Malian people, which would be like say if I'm going to like a wedding or a party or something, I didn't really have those experiences because my mom didn't really go to too much of those parties. It's not to say that she didn't go to any of them, but she just didn't go to them as frequently to where I could have built friendships with other Malian kids around my age group. And she's had her reasons for not really like attending too much of those parties, which the older I get, honestly, the more that I understand why. So if she had attended those like gatherings and stuff, that could have been an opportunity for me to engage with people my age group that are like, from the same place I'm from. But also another way that I could have made connection with other African kids would have been like say the Guinean kids within my building area. But my parents, like I said, growing up, like I went to school and then they always kept me in programs, so I was always being occupied. So once I got out of school, literally my after school came to pick me up. Then once I got out of that after school, my other after school came to pick me up. So I was always occupied in extracurricular activities versus say like the other kids, once they got out of school, they would just go home and kind of just like play around outside. But my parents also didn't feel comfortable with me doing that because it's like, it's not really too safe to just be outside. But because there were like a lot of them and, like a lot of them had like siblings, they were cousins, and a lot of them were just family, it was easier for them to form their community. And again, like they were all from Guinea, so it was easy for them to really relate to each other. Even if I were to engage with them, I still would have been the outsider and there still would have been things that I wouldn't have been able to relate with. So that was also another area of community that I could have been around, but I wasn't around because again, like I wouldn't have really fit in. But also another area of community that I could have had but I didn't have was the African kids who went to the mosque. So basically like the Muslim community. So this is another thing, like my parents, I realized, weren't the typical African parents like the other African kids that I would see. So like the kids that I grew up around, like the Guinean kids or like the other African kids, they were very like strict within the Muslim religion. So they were very, like deep into the religion versus my parents, like, yeah, we were Muslim, but I wasn't like forced to wear a hijab or I didn't have to go to like the mosque or, like my parents were pretty laid back, honestly, when it came to the religion aspect. However, I still was aware of it. I did not have the same experience with religion like my peers did. So oftentimes, like a lot of my peers would talk about how they have to go to Arabic school and, like go to the mosque. And I'm not gonna lie, when I was younger, the stories that I would hear, I used to be so grateful. I used to be like, oh my gosh, thank God my parents do not send me there. Because the stories that I'll be hearing, child, it would be very like aggressive, very abusive, very, if you don't memorize this, then you're getting your ass beat or you're getting a spanking. And I used to be so grateful, like, oh my gosh, thank God my parents do not send me here. Because it sounds like hell over there. And I'm like, for it to be like a prayer school, why are you guys like abusing people into like building a relationship with God? Honestly, that's like a whole nother conversation within itself when it comes to the religion topic. I've been wanting to talk about that. I'm just trying to figure out the right words because I don't want to offend anybody or say the wrong thing. But I will definitely be back with that topic once I get my words together. So when it came to religion, that was also another aspect that I feel like I did not fit in with the African community, because my parents didn't raise me in like the strict Islamic way like other people's parents did. So I also feel like I didn't have that route of connecting there, because a lot of them built their relationships and their friendships when they would go to Arabic school, you know, so they always had that connection. And that was also another area that I didn't fit in. So I was also outcasted there. So it was just like, after experiencing all these little things, it was just always easier and natural for me to gravitate honestly more towards the other crowds of people that were African. So I remember like in grade school, a lot of my best friends were like Hispanic and Black American. And then when I got to high school, it was a lot of Caribbean and then a different group of African kids. But I feel like by then I had become so comfortable with the idea of just being around non-African people, because I started to just feel like I just didn't belong in any other group, if I'm being completely honest. Honestly, when I was younger, I wasn't really thinking of things as in groups. Like I wasn't consciously making any of these choices or decisions, but I just knew that I felt more comfortable just being around non-Africans, because I don't know, it just felt normal, you know, like English wise, I would say. I just knew it felt comfortable being around anybody but African people, because I just always felt like an outcast when it came to the African community. And I felt like when it came to other communities, they were accepting, because we were all like just, you know, like just all vibing, honestly. Like it wasn't really any differences. Of course, like say if it was Hispanic people, like if they had their community, I knew I didn't fit. But when it came to just like the standard of when we're all intermingling together, we're all speaking English, so it just felt natural, it felt normal. And also, I feel like it's important for me to include this part that I'm about to bring up next. Growing up, when you were African, it wasn't the most popular thing like it is nowadays, you know? Nowadays, everyone wants to pick up on the African vibes. And granted, I will definitely say that back in the day, there was such this programming that like Africa was poor and people were just like living in dirt, you know, like the propaganda that was being put on African people and in Africa was just like really just not it. Like, you know, we had like terrible stereotypes that were being put onto us. I feel like just the narrative that was being spun on African people just wasn't really a good one. So I feel like back in the day, it wasn't cool to be African, especially when you're a kid and you're in school and you're seeing like other African kids either being bullied because they don't speak English, or because of their name, or because of the way that they look, or even just like their attire. Also when it came to like the smells, whether it's that people didn't wash, or if it was say like the scent of like the incense, or the smells of like the strong spices and the sauces from the food. So a lot of times I just feel like growing up, like people would try to make you feel ashamed for being African based off of the stereotypes that were put onto African people. So it made it a little easier for me subconsciously to separate myself from the culture, because I didn't want to be tied with it. I didn't want to, you know, like potentially be like bullied. Like growing up, I've never really been bullied, but one thing that I will say, like being that my name is Awa, if you ever watched the movie Soul Plane, that came out when I was like in elementary school. Basically, one of the guys did like this thing like Awawa. So, and my name is Awa. So there was this one guy that would always call me that. And I'm just like, damn, like, why did y'all have to put that in the movie? You know? So that was also another thing where I just felt like I didn't want to be a target, especially since like back in the day, African people were targeted in the sense of like being called all types of name of like African booty scratcher, or, you know, like they would just say some really crazy things to where a person would not dare say that now, because yeah, no, you would not dare say that now. But back in the day, it was so common to where it was just like African people being picked on. And because I've witnessed so many African kids being picked on just out of observation, I just didn't want to be a part of it. So again, it was easy for me to not really be so into the culture because I don't know, like it just felt safer, honestly. Again, subconsciously, but it just made it easier to show up in a more westernized way to kind of, it's basically like assimilating myself. Basically, I was assimilating myself into the Western culture because that was just the common thing. Like that was what was all around me. So it was just easier to fit in than to stand out in a time period where it wasn't like a cool thing to be African, even though it's kind of like, why is that even something that needs to be cool or not? But y'all know what I'm saying, especially coming out of slavery and then with African, that whole back in the day thing between like black and African, it was just a mess, honestly. So I have more perspective now, but you know, that's just me explaining my story of, you know, just back in the day. So then I want to say like late high school, early college, that's when I really started to, you know, just be a little more curious about my background, because I'm like, wow, I just felt so out of touch, especially since I realized, you know, I never really fit in within just like the people around me. But it never made me feel good, because I'm like, I feel like the more that I stay out of touch, the worse this feeling is going to get, especially since, you know, sometimes I would have conversations with my family and I realize between me and my sister, we have two completely different upbringings. Like she grew up back in Africa, so she's gotten to know majority of the family, and when she would like explain just like how her life was growing up, I realized it's completely different from myself. You know, she grew up within the community around family versus me. I grew up in less of a community, more of like towards the individualist perspective of life. But also me not having a relationship with majority of my family, that also caused even more of an identity crisis, I guess I was going through, because I'm like, well damn, like I'm African, I say I'm African, but I used to feel like a fraud calling myself African, because I'm like, I don't really, you know, the connecting is not connecting, you get what I'm saying? So yeah, so with me coming to terms with this potential identity crisis that I was having, so I'm like, you know what, let me take matters into my own hands and do what I can do on my part to relieve myself of this feeling and just, you know, learn more about my background in the best way that I can, you know. So I would start asking my parents more questions, more so asking them questions about their upbringing, just so I could have an understanding, like, you know, like what's your life like. But also I would be on YouTube watching videos, and also I decided when I was in college, like, you know what, let me join the African Student Union. And y'all, listen, when I joined this club, again, I think there might have just been like one Malian girl within the group. There were a lot of Ghanaian and Nigerian people, and they tend to be pretty tight knit. And then I was also quiet and shy, so it wasn't easy for me to like just dive into a group and like open myself up and get comfortable. If anything, when I would go to like the meetings, I would kind of just sit down, you know, be observant, and I would talk. But I also realized that when I would start talking about my life, it was very like, I would always get reactions like, your parents let you do that? Or like, really? Like my parents wouldn't let me do that. And that's when I also started to realize more like, damn, like my family, my upbringing was a lot more Americanized, a lot more lenient than other people's. So basically when they found out that I was dating a person that wasn't African, they will all be like, really? Like, oh my gosh. I'm like, yeah, you know, it was just a lot of different things. Like a lot of things about my life was taboo to them, which also made me feel like even more of an outcast based off of the reactions that I was getting. Not that anybody was trying to make me feel comfortable, but it just, every time I tried to engage, I was always reminded how different I was, which made me feel even more like just isolated, because I'm like, well damn, like I'm trying to connect with y'all, but I'm just different. So me feeling like I didn't have a lot of similarities with them, but also just off of me observing the group together, I realized how cultured they are. So there's things that they could connect on. Even if, let's say, if I were around a group of Malian people, it would be different because we have different things that we could resonate with. Versus if I'm one Malian person in a group of like Ghanaian and Nigerian people, they're going to be talking about things that I don't really have like any type of, you know, connection to. So it's like I'll just be listening, but like I wouldn't really have any inputs. So it's kind of just like I felt like, damn, like what not I don't want to say like what value could I bring, but it's just like what space do I really have within this group, especially with being reminded that I don't have similar experiences as them. So after a while, I just stopped going to the African Student Union because I'm like, damn, like I still don't feel like I fit in. I don't feel like this is a space for me. But I also feel like even if I were to learn about different things, I wouldn't be learning about my culture. I wouldn't be learning about where I'm from. I'll be learning about other people's backgrounds, which is like, being that they were from Ghana and from Nigeria, those are like the common African groups that you would see online. So I didn't really feel like it would have been difficult for me to learn about them. I wanted to learn about my people. So I was just like, you know what, like let me not go to the African Student Union because I don't fit in clearly. So then after college, you know, I just really started to just do a lot of like self-work and, you know, just growing more into myself. I had moved out by then and, you know, I really had time to get to know myself on a deep level and also just like really come into myself. And I realized like a lot of the things that I was partaking in, whether it was like the music that I was listening to, just like the mindset, it's just a lot of different things. I realized that a lot of what I had picked up on was from Black American culture, and it's no shade to it, but like I just didn't resonate with a lot of it. Like deep down inside, I just didn't feel like myself. So I feel like, you know, I took time to kind of like shed myself of things that I've picked up on based off of friends that I've had, people that I was around, social influences, where I'm like, you know what, like this is what I commonly see, but this is not who I am. And this just doesn't resonate with me. So I had to really like strip myself down. And then in my isolation, I really started to get to know myself more and just kind of dive a little deeper into the African culture, but also realizing that like I didn't have to pinpoint specifically like, okay, Mali, I need to learn everything and that's the only thing. Like I had got more comfortable with just learning about different parts. And then for the first time ever, I started dating an African guy and he was from Mali, and I realized like, wow, like I used to always tell my parents like I'm never gonna date an African guy. And the reason why I would say that was just because of all the toxicity that I would see within the African community. So when I was dating him, I was just like, wow, like this is so different, but I like it because he was from Mali, so I felt like there was something to like resonate with him on. But also he spent a lot of his childhood back in Mali, so it's like he had that culture instilled in him. So it's like just in our interactions, I feel like even just from observation, like I learned things from him, and I was just like, you know what, like I actually like this, like it's different. And when I would have conversations with him, it will also resonate with like things like my parents would tell me, but it also highlighted to me like just the different aspects within Mali. Like it wasn't just like one type of Malian person, like there are so many different tribes and then so many different languages. And then I started to realize like, wow, like so when I be hearing people say they're from Mali, but they speak in their language, I'm like, I don't understand what this person is saying. Especially in like a lot of like the Malian music artists, the popular ones. Sometimes they will be speaking the language and I'll be picking up on some words, and sometimes I'll be like, what is this person saying? Like, I don't understand. Until I realize like there's different tribes, there's different languages, just different variations. And you know, so it's like I started to like just learn a lot more. And then also now that I live by myself, and since I've acknowledged the slight trauma that I've experienced when it comes to like when I would try to speak my language to like, you know, strengthen it back up like it once was. Because again, like if a person speaks it to me, I completely understand everything. But when it comes to speaking it, like I will always throw English in there. Sometimes I gotta like really think about like, wait, how do you say this word? So ever since I've acknowledged and just worked through that trauma that I was feeling of just feeling embarrassed or feeling like kind of picked on every time I would try to speak the language, it's like I'm trying and y'all are clowning me, and then y'all wonder why I'm not speaking the language. It's because you're not making me feel comfortable to keep practicing. You get what I'm saying? Like if I mess up on something and you're laughing at me, like now you're gonna get English and I'm not gonna say anything else to you. So being that I be like by myself, I started to catch myself like, you know, practicing just on my own. So it's like there will be times where, say if I'm talking to myself, because I talk to myself a lot out loud, that's just natural to me, like not in a crazy way, but I just speak out loud. Like I would catch myself speaking the language, and I would use those moments of opportunity as like my own judgment free zone where like there's nobody here to judge me, so I'm going to try to figure it out on my own and strengthen it. So that way now I be catching myself when I talk to my mom, I be mixing the language in. Like before I would just do strictly English, but now when I talk to her, like it's like I'm willingly talking in the language, and I just be like in my head like, I'm so proud of you, girl. But you know, it's still that aspect of like, now when it comes to my peers, especially since like I said, like my parents didn't really do the weddings and stuff like that, so I didn't really engage much with the African community. Versus now, especially with social media, all I see is all these weddings, and I just be sitting back like, damn, like I really don't know nobody, because I don't be going nowhere. I don't go to no weddings, I don't go to no parties, no baby showers, no nothing, because I don't have a relationship with people. And sometimes I be feeling like, damn, like I really am like the little lone wolf. Like I really don't be intermingled within the African community. But then there's a part of me where, like I said, like I be seeing the toxic side of things. So I don't really trip too much about not being in the community like that. I'm good where I'm at right here. So, you know, I don't really trip too much about it. But when I be seeing all these parties and everybody just be there, like damn near, I'm not gonna lie, African people be having a wedding like every week. Every week there's a new wedding I see on my Instagram page, and I'd be like, well damn, like within these 4 years of all the weddings I have seen on Instagram, I have not been to a single wedding, but I be seeing the same people literally every week. Every week there's a new outfit being posted. I'm like, well my god. So it goes to also make me feel even more like, well damn, like I really just don't be in the crowd. But like I said, there's a part of me where it's just like, of course, like sometimes I'd be like, oh I wish I could be invited, or oh I wish I could go to these weddings, or you know, like I wish I like knew people where I could go to these events. But then there's also a part of me where it's just like, listen, like I'm comfortable where I'm at. Of course I would like that, but it's also like I would like to be in those environments under the right circumstances, but not just because of obligation or because we all know each other, so we just showing up. You know, like, yeah, so, or even honestly, when it comes to like the whole visual appearance on Instagram, one thing that I've noticed with the African crowd is either they have taken on like a super westernized way of living. So like the women would kind of give like rapper baby mama aesthetics, if I'm being honest, like BBL, mesh bodysuit, ass cheeks hanging out, versus say like the other crowd is like they're giving like the young tanties, they getting more modest, more, you know, like settling down and all of that. And then there's just me, I'm over here posting my little poetry and my plants on Instagram. Like it just feels like there are specific, like I don't know, like there just feels like there's like categories of what I see, and I just don't fit into either of them. But it's like I'm okay, because I really do love the person that I'm growing to be. I feel like I have personality. I feel like me not being so intermingled within the African community has allowed me to grow a personality. And I don't mean this in like a shady type of way, but I feel like I don't know, like the way things be looking to me now, it seemed like everything is like, okay, everybody did whatever they did, say like school, and now everyone's focus seems like it's just marriage and marriage. And like I said, I see a wedding damn near every week, but I don't really be seeing nothing else going on. So I kind of be feeling like, you know what, I'm happy where I am. Not even kind of, I'm happy and grateful where I am, because it's like, I don't know, like I don't feel like I'm in like this cookie cutter mold that it kind of seems like people are following. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm also not trying to say the wrong thing on this internet. So I'm gonna keep it real cute. But like, I understand what I'm trying to say, but I just don't want to say the wrong thing, if you get what I'm saying. Like, okay, like I'm not trying to say like it be giving the girls don't have no personality, but like it be giving like they're following a route that is like carved for them, and they're not stepping out of the lines because of what's expected of them. Like, I hope that makes sense. So it's either two different groups, like the African people who have taken on the super westernized like just culture. So they're like giving rapper baby mama BBL, bust down wig, the guys are scammers, drug dealing, you know, whatever the case. And then the other route seems like they're taking on a super like religious path, and now everything that's on their mind is like a marriage, a man, kids, and then that's it. And that's something that I've seen so common within the African community. It's almost just like, one thing that I always say to myself, I don't want to be the woman that just becomes a wife and I just have kids and then I have no life and no nothing to me. Like, there's nothing about me that's me, you know? Like, I don't want my identity to be wife and mother. I want my identity to, of course, like I would love to be a wife, I would love to be a mother, but I would love to still blossom as an individual versus, okay, this is what I'm trying to say. So it's flowing. I just hope people don't take offense to what I'm saying. I just feel like a lot of what I see within the African community is very, you're doing what you've seen the elders do without really having like a spark to you. You know, I'm gonna just leave this here because I really just don't want to say the wrong thing. Basically, let me use myself as an example to show the counter that I'm trying to explain. So for me, like, my hair is locked. That's something within the African community that has been demonized for so long. And also, I don't wear a hijab, but also I'm not religious, you know? Like, I consider myself more of like a spiritual person. I believe in God. I have a very strong relationship with God. But when it comes to like the religion aspect or just being religious, I just don't resonate with it. But again, like, this is a conversation that I would love to have down the line. But I just feel like growing up, the way that I've seen people build their relationship with God hasn't been from a space of love, but out of a space of fear, which, like I said, like, a lot of the stories I would hear when kids would talk about them going to Arabic school during the weekend, it was just like very like abusive, very, they were getting like beat on, they were getting hit on, yelled at, and I'm just like, it sounded like hell to me, if I'm being completely honest. Or like parents being like super strict, but in a way where it's just, to me, it just always came off very toxic. And I feel like if you're going to teach a person about God, like for me personally, my relationship with God was strengthened, but through me learning about spirituality and learning to build a relationship with God through love, through myself, but not out of fear. So that's why I say, like, it's not anything against religion per se. It's just the foundation of what I've heard when it comes to religion hasn't been the best, but the way that I've learned about it has strengthened my relationship with God so much that it's like, it just makes sense to me. You know what I'm saying? So that's like another thing. So I feel like even when it comes to just like belief wise, like, I don't fit in. Like, my mindset is so much more open than I feel like the African community that I have around me. I feel like they're very like one track minded. Like, what they've seen be done is what they're continuing to follow. Like no one's really like stepping outside of the box, but I also understand that within the African community, they're very like judgmental. I feel like the African community builds people pleasers, so people are afraid to step out of the line. So oftentimes they just follow what's common to not really seem like the outcast, but also not to be like the black sheep. But also people don't want to come off as a disgrace to their family, or they don't want to, you know, give their family's name a bad reputation. But I'm the type of person, I'm like, listen, with my beliefs and the way I carry myself, can't nobody ever say that I am bringing any type of bad shame or bad reputation onto the family, because I carry myself very well and I feel like I have a pretty great head on my shoulders. So for me, it's kind of just like knowing the way that I show up and the way that I carry myself. For me to step outside of the box and to not follow the straight path that everyone else follows, I have learned to become confident in myself in showing up. And I'm also open to, if you're gonna judge me, then judge me, you know, like that has nothing to do with me, because at the end of the day, I see things on a much deeper level that, like, if anybody ever tried to like really say something, like I will always come with logic to the conversation, to where it's like you couldn't make me feel bad about my decisions. You couldn't like gaslight me or try to like manipulate me into feeling like how I move is wrong because it's not the norm, because it's not the standard. Like you can't call me a bad person because I don't show up the way that you show up, because I know I'm very much a good person, you know? So it's like a lot of things I had to grow to just be comfortable with me not fitting into the box. To where it's just like, listen, if you judge me, you judge me. Basically for me, I've gotten to a point of acceptance where I kind of feel like God has built my strength up for this moment, because I've never felt like I was a part of the community. I've always felt outcasted. So now that like people are really getting into their adulthood, it's like, and the more that I'm noticing like I don't fit in, and the more that I'm growing into my own person with my own beliefs and just the way that I move, and also just my observation of the community and things that I definitely don't want to replicate, I feel like I just feel a lot more confident in the way that I show up, because it's like, well, I may be different, but I am who I am and I love who I am. And honestly, like I wouldn't change anything about it. So as I am continuing to grow in just like my understanding of the culture and just, you know, building myself, yeah, I may not be the most knowledgeable African person, but I am still African and I still belong. And I'm not going to make myself feel like, oh, guilty for, you know, referring to myself as African because I don't feel African enough, because I don't feel like I fit in enough. And I also feel like another thing, so this particular example that I'm about to give is basically my mom's story, but I resonate with this so much. Like I feel like for her, she came here when she was, let's say, like mid-20s, and you coming from one country to another country in a time where African people are not really accepted and not really praised, she also had to go through that assimilation process, especially when you're at work and you're around a lot of American people that speak English. If you are an African person and you have an accent, or you know, you can't speak English, people are mean, they're rude, they'll be very quick to be like, oh, you need to go back to your country. Like my mom has told me so many different things that she has heard from, say, like customers and things like that. I can only imagine how that would make a person feel, to where you feel like targeted, you feel like you need to assimilate yourself in order to prevent experiences like those from happening. So, you know, you have to strengthen your English. You have to, especially when you're working, say, like around a lot of people and you're hearing them badmouth other African people, whether it's the way that they smell, the way that they dress and things like that. You feel like you're going to do everything in your power to not even be associated with those stereotypes. So you're going to make sure you take extra well care of yourself so that you're not, you know, like basically being a target. So I feel like with my mom experiencing, you know, like those things at work, that can play a role in feeling like you need to assimilate. But also with her kind of being like introverted in the sense of like not really going to like the parties and the events and stuff like that, that also kind of put her aside from like fitting into the culture, but also with my mom just working within the fashion industry, being that she's in America, it's not like she's encountering African clothing, African material. She's working in stores that are offering designer products, or like, you know, like they're selling American based products. So if she's always around American based products, she's shopping American based products, especially if she's getting discounts. Now, when it's time to go to African events, the type of attire that African people are used to is like bazins, you know, like African attire, African dresses and stuff like that. But now that my mom has been in a culture that she's basically assimilated to and she's around so frequently, her type of dress attire is like a fancy formal dress. So in her mind, it's like, yeah, African, you're going to African party, you could wear African clothes. But she has in her mind, like, okay, when you going to a party, you're gonna wear a nice, you know, gown and things like that, because that's what she's used to seeing for so many years. Since I was a kid, she's been in the fashion industry. So if she now wears one of those gowns to an African party, there is now a disconnect there, because she's showing up Americanized to the African people, and now they're looking at her like, oh, she's Americanized. So now that comes with a feeling of her feeling judged and her feeling like she doesn't fit in, which is the feelings that I felt being around the African community. You feel like, damn, like, okay, I feel like I'm different, especially when people are calling it out. So I can also understand now, when I think about it from her perspective, like that playing a role in why she didn't really engage too much within the African parties and stuff like that, because it's like what she's used to, being that she has broadened her horizons, like engaging with different cultures. Because when you're in the fashion industry, you're literally encountering so many different people. You're not just seeing African culture versus people who are in the African community who are just staying within the African community. It's almost like they aren't seeing the things outside of the African community, almost like they still have the mindset like if they're back home. There now becomes a clash, because what's normal to my mom versus what's normal to them is now different. So it's just very, like, I've noticed is that there are a lot of African people in America who are like very deep into the culture, very deep into the lifestyle like they have back home, versus my family. They came from Africa, but they also adopted the American culture while still being African, while still doing things of culture. But there's like a blend, versus the African community that I will be around. It's very just African, like, you know, there is no blend, there is no merge. So it can be kind of difficult to where we don't fit in, but then also we feel like we're too African for the American community. Well, actually, no, I wouldn't really say that, because I feel like now the American community, and when I say American, I just mean everyone outside of African people. I feel like being that like African culture is something that has become popular and mainstream, we are now normal to the world. You get what I'm saying? So it's like now we are like in this one big melting pot, versus the African community kind of feels just the African community versus like a mix. So the storage on my camera is actually running out, so I'm gonna like wrap this video up. I feel like I pretty much touched on like the main points of just feeling like I'm too Americanized for the African community and not really ever feeling like I fit in. And I feel like the only way that I'll be able to fit in with the African person is if they had like a balance of westernized, which goes into what I was saying. Like the guy that I was dating, one thing that I really loved, like he was cultured, but he was also westernized. So it was like that perfect balance of like, I can connect with you, but I can also learn from you. And I actually really love that. So it's like, yeah, you're culture, but you're also westernized enough for me to connect with you, to where it doesn't feel like we're so far off or we're so far different, you know? So yeah. And as I am growing, I am just like learning to embrace my culture even more. I'm learning not to feel guilty about not really knowing as much as I would like to know. I'm just honestly on my journey of self-acceptance of where I am and not really paying attention to people's projections of me being westernized. I know where I am on the spectrum and I'm comfortable with it, you know, like I'm taking my time to learn more about the culture and, you know, like just accepting me for where I am and not really paying too much attention to people who try to make me feel like, oh, I'm not African enough. Because again, I did not ask you, okay? So keep your opinion to yourself, please, and thank you. I've accepted. My parents were young and they did the best that they could, you know, with what they knew how to, especially being first-time parents and not being around the community that they're used to. So, you know, I'm still grateful for just like my upbringing. And also I feel like I'm happy that I didn't really have that like deep rooted sense of community, because I feel like it would have been a lot more difficult for me to grow as my own individual with my own mindset. Because honestly, I feel like a lot of them, like I said, is very like, you saw everybody go down this route, so you're gonna go down that route even if you don't want to go down that route. But because you don't want to be a disgrace to your family, you're gonna go down that route because you feel like you have to. That's why I feel like I'm grateful for the way my life has went, because it has allowed me the flexibility of not feeling chained down to feel like I need to be something that I don't resonate with because everyone else is being that way. So like I said, like my parents did the best that they could, especially being that they had to work a lot. And you know, like they provided the way that they knew how to, the best way that they knew how to. And they did try, and I was just being a little hard-headed. But now that I'm an adult, I'm definitely taking matters into my own hands to just, you know, educate myself in the best way, ask them questions when I can. You know, now that I have the internet, I have YouTube, I can always just get a peek into other people's lives that are African. And just me observing all these weddings also, like I'm definitely learning about like just the different cultures, how they do things, and it's just really like beautiful to see. So I'm taking advantage of the internet and letting it be my teacher, and hopefully, you know, I encounter all the information that I want. And also one day, God willing, I will go visit Africa for myself and I will see the beauty for what it is, because I know that everything that they were telling us on them damn TVs and them damn infomercials were lies, okay? They were lying and they were collecting y'all's coins and y'all don't even know what they were doing with it. But anyways, I'm gonna end this video here because my storage is literally running out. So thank you for watching this video, and if you have any similar experiences to mine, please comment it below so you know we don't all feel alone. Let me know. Let your girl know that she is not alone in this, and I'm not an outcast actually. But anyways, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy and stay tuned for my next upload. Bye.